Welcome back to another video. My name's Carl and I run Tri-Tec Automotive. We are independent Mercedes and AMG specialist based in Swindon. Today we have a W204C class in and we're going to be carrying out a service on the automatic gearbox. This car originally came in for diagnosis. It had multiple warning lights on the dashboard, ESP, ABS, run flat system, power steering went heavy. It had already been to another garage and they'd fitted a wheel speed sensor and they didn't fix it, so the customer then asked us to take a look at it. I've now replaced that wheel speed sensor with a genuine sensor and it's fixed. So there's one thing to bear in mind on Mercedes in particular, anything electrical, genuine parts is always the way to go, especially on control units and sensors, things like that. They just don't like aftermarket parts. And although that was a brand new wheel speed sensor, the aftermarket one was just not compatible with the car. So we got that fixed and then the customer said, okay, like whilst it's there, can you carry out service? So we're going to do just a service, which is an engine oil and filter change and then a general health check. And we're also going to be servicing the gearbox, which is the main purpose of this video. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of the gearbox service, not necessarily a step-by-step guide, but we're going to show you the key parts of it, how we do it, why we do it. I'll show you on the bench now all of the parts that we have to carry out this service from our local Mercedes dealer. As you can see here, we're going to be doing engine oil, oil filter, and a new sump washer, but we won't show too much of that. We're going to focus on the gearbox oil. So 9 litres of gearbox oil. Important to make sure you get the correct oil for the gearbox because there are a few different types and there are different colours, so that's very important to check. New gearbox oil filter that goes inside the sump pan. Also got new magnets. You don't necessarily need the magnets, you can just clean and reuse the old ones, but when we order this from our local dealer, their system basically has a package and they just click on the package and it just sends all of the parts required for the gearbox. So it includes the magnets and they're only £1 or so each. New washer for the gearbox sump plug, new bolts for the gearbox pan as they are one-time use, and if you've never felt them before, they're extremely light and easy to snap. New level tube which sits inside the pan, and then the drain plug for the torque converter. Finally, the new seal for the sump pan. So we're going to get the car up in the air now, going to get the gearbox oil drained out of it and take the pan off and see what we find. So with the car up in the air and the undertray off, you can see the transmission. This is the sump pan that we're going to be removing. This is the drain plug for the gearbox. This is the auxiliary oil pump which we will also be removing. It's a torque converter drain plug. So this pump works in addition to the main pump inside the gearbox and basically just supplies extra pressure when required, particularly when the engine switches off for eco stop start. So you'll only see this pump on cars that have eco stop start function, so it provides extra pressure during eco stop start and also during initial startups, and basically just helps the main pump. We'll be moving that out of the way. It's always a good idea to have a look, just make sure you've got no leaks before you start. Have a look at the condition of the pan. It is a little bit corroded around that drain plug there, but it looks like it's just the kind of the coating flaking off and it's not eating into it too much. I have replaced these in the past, especially on the older 5-speed gearboxes. They are getting to a point now where they are rusting through, so it's always good to check that. And some people say to me, kind of, how often should I service my gearbox, and also kind of why should I service it? So on these 7229 gearboxes, in this particular car, it's every 5 years it needs to be done. It's also due on mileage, so it's time or mileage, whichever one comes first, but most people don't hit the mileage, and it basically should be done every 5 years regardless of kind of how many miles you've done. Obviously the reason for doing it is to prolong the life of the gearbox. Same as anything, the oil degrades. Some gearboxes, not so much Mercedes ones, but some of the manufacturers do sealed for life gearboxes, which is never a good idea. The oil always degrades over time, and with heat cycles, if you want the gearbox to continue shifting nicely and last as long as possible, it's always a good idea to get the service done. These gearboxes can be expensive to fix, same as any automatic transmission. If you get faults internally in the box, it can be time consuming and expensive to fix. The other thing that people ask me is, why is a gearbox service more expensive than the general oil change service? And it's, as you can see from the parts, to do an oil change you need engine oil, oil filter, a sump washer, and undo one drain plug, drain the oil out, change the filter, put it back together, it's done. So there's considerably more parts involved with the gearbox if you include all the bolts, the magnets, the level pipe. The filter is more expensive, the oil is more expensive, so the parts alone are more expensive, plus the labour time involved is more to do a gearbox oil service than it is to do the A service. So that's basically where the cost comes from. These ones aren't too bad. The 9-speed gearboxes in the newer C classes and E classes are more expensive because the oil filter is now built into the sump pan of the gearbox. So you have to replace the complete plastic pan, which from memory alone is nearly £200 for the pan, and then the oil is expensive and the bolts again, so they're currently the most expensive one to do. So it's definitely worth getting them serviced on time and doing your best to prevent any damage occurring. We take a 6mm Allen key, take the drain plug out of the sump pan. And we won't get much oil out now because the level tube will be holding the majority of it. So we need to move the level tube out of the way to fully drain the pan. If you imagine this is sat in the gearbox pan and the oil level is up to the top here and it won't drain in. So what you need to do is kind of knock this over or push it out so that it allows all the oil to drain out. There is a special tool for it which goes up inside, like a punch that knocks it upwards, but it just makes a massive mess. So what I've always used is a 90-degree pick. And if you've got one that's got the right angle on it, once it's started dripping like that, you can just go up inside and you can just give it a little flick like that and it'll knock the level tube out of the way. And now it will drain the majority of the oil out. There'll still always be a little bit in the pan, but it will get most of it out so that you don't make too much of a mess when you lower the pan down. Next step whilst that's draining will be to remove these wiring clips here and then also disconnect the auxiliary pump. Again, you can use a small pick for that and they'll just unhook out the way. Same with this one. The wiring unclipped and just out the way. At this point you can take a T30 and you can just crack off the 3 bolts holding the auxiliary oil pump and just pull that little heat shield out the way. Remove the bolts from here. So that's our auxiliary oil pump removed that sits here and it just drains oil out of these 2 ports, and then we're going to pull this grommet out and that's the torque converter up in there. So we now need to spin the torque converter to find the drain plug. We'll start draining that and then we'll also get all these bolts out and then drop the pan to reveal the filter. Right, so we have skipped forward slightly. Some of this is just difficult for me to do because I need both hands to do it and try and hold the camera as well. I need a filming assistant really. I'll show you where we're at. The gearbox pan off. I've just undone the 6 bolts around the outer edge. Lowered it down because there is still some oil in the bottom of the sump pan. So just be careful not to spill that everywhere. Plug the engine over, torque converter drain plug out. The best way to do this is actually put a straw into the torque converter and it drains faster, because otherwise it takes ages and ages to just drip out 1 drip at a time. But this also works. A little right angled pick and just put it in and it runs down the pick rather than filling up the bottom of the bell housing here, which can then be difficult to get out afterwards. And I'll just clean the pick up with some brake cleaner afterwards. These are the parts we have. Our auxiliary oil pump. Whilst it's off, just want to have a look at these 2 seals, make sure they're all okay. There's the grommet, sits above that covers the torque converter drain plug, and there's our 3 bolts for the pump, T30 that we took off of the bracket, our drain plug, and we've got our 6 kind of pan holders that sit around the edge, like so. One of them is different, which is the front right hand corner, and this is our pan that we've got off, still got some oil in there. These are our magnets, and this is typical, to be honest, to have this kind of grey metallic paste but no actual chunks of metal. And you'll probably find when we drain this out in the bottom of the pan will be the same as well, just a fine, very fine grey kind of paste, but hopefully as little as possible on the actual pan, and the majority of it's on the magnet. And after doing hundreds of these, that is what I would expect to see. That is perfectly normal for one of these gearboxes, so don't panic if you see that kind of pasty metallic stuff on the magnets. That's fine. If you have physical pieces of metal, then there's something going on. But the only time I personally have ever seen a gearbox that's got pieces of metal on the magnets is when I stripped it, because we already knew there was a problem with it. It would be very unlikely that your gearbox would be perfectly fine, cars driving fine, shifting gear fine, and you just decide to do a gearbox oil change and then find metal in it. Yes, it's possible, but usually you would have symptoms of a gearbox fault, which would then lead you to take the pan off and find the metal. So you want to get the pan as clean as possible. So we've drained the majority of the oil out of it, and we've wiped it out. A load of brake cleaner, air line, and then blue roll, and then just basically keep going over it with the blue roll until there's nothing coming off it, until it's nice and clean. And then we will put our new level tube in. New magnets, make sure they're nice and clean, make sure they haven't kind of picked anything up off workbench. Put those into place. And then we can put our seal on, which does have these little locating tabs that go into the holes. There's 3 or 4 of those around the edge, so make sure they're all in. So old filter out, and then it literally just pulls down. New filter in, make sure the seal comes off on the old filter and doesn't get stuck up in here. Torque converter drain plug is back in, torqued up, and then you just want to put this little rubber grommet back in. It's a good idea to get some brake cleaner up in there, and also an airline if you've got it. Just blow it all out, because you don't want any gearbox oil kind of dripping back out here at a later date once it gets hot. So now I'll give this a clean up around the edge, and then get the sump pan back on. Put the pan back in place. It's a good idea to go all the way around and just make sure the seal's in place, because they do have a tendency to jump out. And I've started the torque procedure, so I've got the torque range set to 4. I've done a few of them already, but I'll just show you a couple. 4 Newton meters, and then we're going to go around and do 180 degrees on all 6, and that will be the pan all torqued back on. As you can see, the corrosion around the hole, we couldn't see any corrosion inside the pan, and it does just look like the paint's flaking off, which I see on pretty much all of these. I've had a couple of people comment on my other videos, kind of surprised at the corrosion that they see on some of the cars that I'm working on. But as I've explained, it's just that we're in England, basically. And this level of corrosion is normal for a 13, 14-year-old car. So I wouldn't change that pan. It will seal fine. The sump plug and the washer will seal fine. If you wanted to, you could put a new pan on it, but it's not really required. It's not corroded enough that I'm worried about it actually leaking or the washer not sealing. It's also worth noting, if you're doing one of these gearboxes, this one is the easiest one to do because there's no brackets in the way. But if you're doing an E-class, like a W212, you'll have an extra bracket which bolts into these 2 holes here, and it comes across and along, and it joins onto the exhaust. And if you were doing a 204 C63, you'll have the same, but kind of on both sides. Being a V8, the second exhaust pipe runs down here, and there's a bracket that joins both exhausts and then bolts up in there. So you'll need to remove that, or at least loosen it to give you some room to lower the pan down. The next step is to put the oil back in the gearbox. So I know that because we've drained the pan and the torque converter, this is going to take somewhere between 8 and 9 litres. The issue you have is you can't put that much in the gearbox in one go, because it will come back out the top. So when you pump it in, it doesn't really get into the torque converter. It just fills the sump and starts to fill up the body of the gearbox. So if you put any more than kind of 7 litres in, it will come out the breather at the top and just run down the side of the gearbox. So what I'm going to have to do is put like somewhere between 6 and 7 in, start the engine, and then once it's pushed oil into the torque converter, I can then add a couple more litres to get the kind of 8 to 9 we want. Obviously with these, you overfill them slightly. You fill them beyond the top of that level tube, run them up to the correct temperature, and then remove kind of the pump and the fitting and let it drain out. It's not natural really, if you haven't done one of these before, to have the engine running, the car in the air, and then remove the drain plug. It just doesn't feel natural. It feels like you're letting all the oil out of the gearbox, but you're not. As long as you've got the level tube in place, it can only drain down to that level, and there's no risk of damage to the gearbox. If you don't have a level tube in place, it will empty the whole gearbox, and obviously you will have big issues. So definitely make sure that's in place. So I'll put the oil in now, and then we will run it up to temperature. So all back together, oil is in, or the first 7 is in, so I need to start it up now, let the oil flow through the box, and then I can top it the rest. I've got the diagnostic system connected so that I can read the gearbox temperature. I have got Zentry genuine Mercedes diagnostics, but it's not really needed for this, so it's just quicker and easier to plug in my Topdon, scan for codes, and then get the gearbox temperature, which is here, showing it in Fahrenheit currently. So it needs to get to 45 degrees Celsius, which is 113 Fahrenheit. Also got, you can see, I have turned off the ESP traction control because I need to drive it through the gears on the ramp. I need to put it in drive, go up through the gears, put it in reverse to let the oil flow around the gearbox, and the ESP will cut the power. So it's easier to just turn it off, and it will allow me to do what I need to do. So the gearbox level's all set. We let it run for a while until it was up to the correct temperature, and then remove the pump from the bottom and let it drain out. The manual says to let it drain out until it's dripping, and then refit the drain plug with the new washer, and then that is it. The level is correct, which is what we have done. So now we'll take it for a drive, make sure it changes the gear nicely and nice and smooth. There were no fault codes in there. One thing I like to do when I have a customer book in for a gearbox service, especially if they specifically call and ask for a gearbox service, I will ask them if they're having it done just because it's part of the schedule and it's due, or if they have a fault with the gearbox, because sometimes people will have a fault such as harsh shifting or holding on to gears, that kind of thing, and they'll just book it in for a service, which sometimes can work. It's actually quite surprising the amount of gearbox or auto gearbox issues that can be cured with a decent service, but it's better for me to know up front if there is an issue with the gearbox, and then we maybe approach it in a different way, and we look at the fault codes first, and we can reset adaptions and kind of reteach the gear shift points and all that kind of stuff. So if you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. We've got some more videos coming, a couple on the C63 head gaskets. The heads are just at the machine shop now, so that should be going back together soon. I believe we've also got another C63 coming in shortly with an engine noise, so hopefully get a video on that one. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an overview of these 722.9 gearboxes and how we service them and why we service them. So if you are local to us and you've got a Mercedes with this gearbox in, or any of the gearboxes for that matter, feel free to drop us a message.